My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Whether you're selling a little or a lot, Shopify helps you do your thing, however you cha-ching. From the launch your online shop stage, all the way to the we just hit 1 million orders stage. No matter what stage you're in, Shopify's there to help you grow. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/special offer, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/special offer.
Hey everyone, welcome to Keep Watch Pass on the It's Not That Bad podcast channel, a proud member of the Pantheon Podcast Network. When it comes to telling a life story, a biographical film is sometimes the way to go. A biopic, or as my lovely wife Carrie occasionally calls it, a biopic. She said it once, I will never let her forget it. But no, we're talking about biopic films, and here to join me to tell us his story, Carson Elcome is back on the show. Carson, welcome back. How you doing?
I am wonderful. On the topic of biopic, I've been told I look like Adam Driver if he was 20. Do you think I could play Adam Driver in a biopic?
I'm not quite sure about that, because we need to get your hair a little bit longer and probably dye it a little bit. I've unfortunately been told that I look like present day Barry Gibb, so we don't want to go down that road. I don't see that at all. Whoever said that is absolute nonsense. You tell my brother that that's absolute nonsense then, because of course my brother would say I look like present day Barry Gibb. But here we are. So when it comes to biopic movies, what made you want to tackle this topic?
I think it's something that people don't inherently talk about until they've seen one. I mean, you have some really big ones in the last few years. Like you got Rocket Man. This year in particular, they had One Love. I feel like in this era, you're seeing a lot of musical biopics. Obviously, speaking of Adam Driver last year, you had Ferrari. So I think every time a biopic movie comes out, it gets a lot of instant reception because of what people tend to be passionate about or love, and then seeing that translated to a cinematic piece. But just because we keep getting them doesn't always mean they're good. And I think that was the enticing part about wanting to do the biopic genre.
Yeah, and that's the thing. When you're telling someone's life story, of course, I mean, there's that old saying of, history is written by the winners. And history is malleable. There's a reason why the Mandela effect exists, because someone's story can't always necessarily be defined by the person telling this story. And you get that with movies a lot, where it's like, oh, I watched this movie. It said this about you. I'm like, oh, yeah, it's a movie. That's not true. But we're not here to, talk about the veracity or the truthfulness of some of these films. We're talking about the movies as a whole. And here's what we're going to do. We're going to pick 3 movies each: a keep, a watch, and a pass. The keep is one that, tell me your story again. That's pretty good. The watch is one that, it's not a bad story. I'm not unhappy that you told me about it. And the pass is one that, probably like the person as well, we'd pass on that as well. So, Carson, your topic, you start. What is your keep biopic?
My keep biopic, to quote the lovely Carrie.
Yeah, you're going to keep saying biopic now.
Honestly, you mentioned it and I'm using that.
Yeah, you're going to say it in normal conversation. People are going to be like, the are you talking about?
No, it's honestly sticking. I kind of love it. But I'm choosing a movie that maybe some listeners haven't even heard of, because A, it came out in 2023, and B, it's going to be a Canadian classic in a few years. And that movie is Blackberry. Not only is it my favorite biopic ever made, I saw it on release day in Toronto at the Scotiabank Cineplex, but I also got the opportunity to meet and speak with director Matthew Johnson after it, and music head Jay Mackerel about the film. But it was absolutely incredible. Not to mention, if this was any big studio in any American movie, Glenn Howerton as co-owner of BlackBerry, Jim Balsillie, would have been an Oscar-nominated role. Jason, I don't know if you've seen this movie, but not only is it one of the most entertaining and wild ride biopics or biopics you've ever seen, but it's not only, in my opinion, and I love It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, Glenn Howerton's best role, but Canadian icon Jay Baruchel's best role. It's entertaining, it resonates, it's relatable because I lived in Kitchener-Waterloo for 3 years. All my family lives there, and that's where BlackBerry started, so there's a lot of emotional ties to it. But it is just pure serotonin, entertainment, and knowledge and learning about this company. It's just remarkable to me.
So you say, Canadian acting icon, and how did you not follow that up with Michael Ironside? Because frickin' Michael Ironside. But I mean, having worked in sports and covering some of the stories about Jim Balsillie and his quest to buy a hockey team, because of course you have Mark Critch in this film playing Gary Bettman. Also, Carrie Elways as Carl Yankowski, the owner of Palm. I have not seen this film, but I mean, I remember growing up in this tech era and Palm Pilots and Blackberries. My old BlackBerry phone had the greatest keyboard ever. And I know people who still love their BlackBerries to this day. The technology was never the problem with BlackBerry. And for a company to really stand on top of any market, and really before iPhone and Android really kicked in and proved that it was never about the hardware to begin with, but it was all about the software, BlackBerry was the trendy piece of equipment to own. If you had a BlackBerry, you were someone. That's kind of how it worked.
And I love that you say literally everything you just said, because every piece you just touched on is a part of the movie. As an example, when you say the status symbol of the BlackBerry, there's a scene in this movie where Glenn Howerton goes to his sales team and he says, "You're no longer sales guys. You're brand ambassadors. You're models. I want you to go to every rich place in Southern Ontario, and I want people to see you obnoxiously using this phone." And that encapsulates that era of maybe materialism and status, but it sums it up brilliantly. There's not a piece of BlackBerry that doesn't touch a part of the absolute explosion that is this company and the downfall of this company as well. And just to say again, if BlackBerry still made phones, I would buy a BlackBerry right now.
Yeah. I mean, I remember like having my BlackBerry and there'd be like no games on it whatsoever. Like maybe you were lucky and you got like Snake and Solitaire and that was about it. But I mean, that keyboard, I remember like having to write emails. I'm like, my thumbs were like speed demons on that thing.
And that's a huge part of the movie. And Jay Baruchel even says it. And he's like, what's the biggest thing about BlackBerry when you think of it? The click, the BlackBerry click. And it just everything, especially from a Canadian perspective, is brilliant. It's a Canadian director. It's a primarily Canadian cast. Obviously, you have Glenn Howerton in there as well. But it's just, you know how, and I mean, some listeners aren't going to even know what we're saying here, but do you remember on CBC when you would get those 30-second snippets of
the Canadian Heritage moment? Yeah.
Yeah, you got it. Picture that in the most positive, fun way and putting it into a movie. It's brilliant. The performances are brilliant. The directing and cinematography is unique. Jay Mackerel, who did the music, did the entire soundtrack using BlackBerry sounds. It's insane. If you have not seen this movie, get your ass to Amazon, rent it, stream it, whatever you want. Go see this film because it is incredible.
See, I have to tell my wife about this film now because she had a Palm Pilot. She had like multiple Palm Pilots like through their time, and she's gonna be like, "Oh, I miss my Palm Pilot." Of course, now everything's in like whatever phone you want, but again, it's the software, not the hardware.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Whether you're selling a little or a lot, Shopify helps you do your thing, however you cha-ching. From the launch your online shop stage, all the way to the we just hit 1 million orders stage. No matter what stage you're in, Shopify's there to help you grow. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/special offer, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/special offer.
For my keep film, I had two to choose from. And coincidentally, they both actually starred Tom Hanks. So I'll tell you the one I didn't go with first. And that was Charlie Wilson's War. One of my absolute favorite Tom Hanks films. But it pales.
Hold on. Before you continue, once you're done this, can I guess what your keep is?
I'm going to let you guess right now.
Is it Catch Me If You Can?
It is Catch Me If You Can.
You're damn right it is.
The biographical film of Frank Abagnale Jr., one of the biggest con men of his time, but then ended up working with the FBI after, of course, leading them on a multi-year chase to try to catch him. Honestly, if I had to pick my favorite Leo DiCaprio film, this is it. And it's a solid Tom Hanks performance. And the film is chock-a-block full of a fantastic cast. Even my oldest son loves this film to the point of he ended up going out and getting a copy of the book so he could read it because he was that fascinated with the story. Like, it is an absolute fascinating tale. Steven Spielberg painted a perfect time frame picture for the film. It felt like it was in that time. Like everything was so spot on. And then we get to my watch film. And it's a little bit of a different take on this. And I go back to 1993 and Dragon, the Bruce Lee story. This was one of those films that I was fascinated with primarily because it was also on the movie networks a lot. So I watched it a lot. Starring Jason Scott Lee as Bruce Lee. No, there's no relation. It had Lauren Holly as his wife, Linda. Now, growing up, I watched The Green Hornet on reruns as a kid, at the same time as Batman was in syndication as well. So, I knew who Bruce Lee was. And this film, in all of its 90s glory, and I'll be very honest, right? There's a reason why I thought my keep, it's a watch. I was hooked on the story. I was hooked on the story of Bruce Lee and how he rose up and created this form of martial arts. And, in hindsight, it cuts a little deep because in the film, we see the birth of Brandon Lee. And just weeks before the release of the film, Brandon Lee was killed during the making of The Crow, which came out the following year. And this film is actually dedicated to the memory of Brandon Lee. So it's a little heartbreaking in that aspect, but that's more in hindsight. But aside from a true biography documentary of Bruce Lee, and there are those out there, Dragon the Bruce Lee story is probably the best docudrama about him.
So did you read the book that this was based on, the Man I Only Knew?
Literacy. What are you talking about?
Fair enough. I had to read it as a project in, I want to say 10th or 11th grade. We had a choice of a few, and I can't remember the other ones, but I chose that one. And if it's anything like the book, I haven't seen the movie, unfortunately, but the detail it goes into and the way it describes his upbringing all the way to kind of when he rose to fame is just incredible. So does that resonate on screen, as much as it did in the book?
So here's the thing, like 1993, this film comes out, and I'm not one to sit down and, make a point of watching a biopic. I'm not in 1993. This film and the way it was done captivated me. The story of Bruce and Linda in that era as a mixed race couple, when it wasn't exactly looked upon as normally as it is today, as it should be, but the challenges that they had overcome. And then the fact that they didn't have much money, but Bruce wanted to start his dojo. And then there were the other mixed, the martial arts purists who didn't want him trying to teach something that was different that he wrote. Like, there was so much overcoming adversity in this film that it gripped you. And you were like, yeah, Bruce, kick that shit out of him. You do you. I would still watch it today. It is actually a captivating watch, even though it does sensationalize a little bit of it, as I'm sure most biographical films do. But I don't think it does it to the detriment of the story.
No, I can absolutely respect that. Because obviously you want that dramatization to build on what the story is for your visual senses. But as long as it keeps that true elegance to his life, then I'm sure you have a really solid film on your hands.
Oh, absolutely. All right. So now for your watch film, what did you go with?
So before I say what my watch I decided on was, the one I was really grappling with in my head was Joaquin Phoenix and Walk the Line, about the story of Johnny Cash. I mean, I grew up a big chunk of my life in Southern Alberta. My favorite hockey team is the Calgary Flames. Their win song has always been Johnny Cash, Ring of Fire. So I always had this part of me that loved Johnny Cash. And dare I say that Walk the Line with Joaquin Phoenix was a better portrayal than his performance in Joker. Might be a little far-fetched, but that's what I stand by.
No, I think that's a fair take.
See, I'm glad you understand. But to move away from that, I decided on another film that really resonated with me, especially after graduating high school and kind of finding my way in this world. And that is 2007's Sean Penn directed Into the Wild, starring Emile Hirsch, Kristen Stewart, Vince Vaughn, so on and so forth. The story of Christopher McCandless is absolutely fascinating to me. I read the book as well by John Krakauer about his life and kind of his ideology. You could really interpret this movie as a philosophical film. The story of this young man realizing that there's so much rampant consumerism and profits and kind of just the innate loss of what really matters as a person, and deciding to just give his entire savings coming from a rich family to charity, rid himself of all of his possessions, and set out on a journey to Alaska. And his story through that is not only inspiring, but quite beautiful, given his unfortunate death during his trip to Alaska. It just really, to me, encapsulated what as a society we prioritize. And Emile Hirsch in this film is incredible. This is his best performance to date, in my opinion. He's phenomenal in it. Sean Penn directed a beautiful film. Whenever it comes on, if I see it anywhere, I will sit and watch it. It's truly a remarkable story about not only the will that someone can have, but the clarity of maybe what actually matters, even if that means sacrificing some of the closest things to you.
I think that's one of the things about biopics is that you're going to have different categories of them. You're going to have ones about historical figures. You're going to have ones that are about musicians. Then you're going to have ones that are real life tales of overcoming and just defying the elements, and then sometimes the gods themselves. Those I find are the ones that are a bit more of the heart-wrenching, because you know for the most part that it doesn't end well. So you know what's going to happen, but you still don't look forward to it when it does happen. I have not seen this film, but based on what you said, I'm down for watching it.
It's got to go on your list. It honestly changes the way you think about your day-to-day life. You know, when you finish watching or reading something and you just sit back for that minute and realize, man, I've been in this just off mental state, and this kind of recentered me to what is really important. And it does that beautifully. And I just can't give it more praise. And it was once again a big toss up between my keep choice being Blackberry, but it makes me feel something that not a lot of movies can. And not to say that maybe fiction can do that, but just when you have this real life experience of this kid exploring not only his inner self, but the world around him, it just can't help but make you stop and think.
Oh, absolutely. But now we get to your pass film. So I'm very, very curious what you ended up going with.
This is going to be really controversial, and I'm okay with that. Even considering that the main star of this movie won an Oscar for his role. And it's 2018's Bohemian Rhapsody.
Really?
And it's not to say it's inherently a bad movie, but it's just, we've gotten into this stage where I feel like every 4 or 5 months we just have another musical biopic. I mean, it's gotten really, really repetitive to me. And I go back to watch this movie as I was thinking about it a few weeks ago, and that's what made me bring this initial topic up, actually. And I just realized that although it tells a compelling story about Freddie Mercury and Queen and about his life and the band's life and so on and so forth, and you can take a lot away from that, from a sheer filmmaking perspective, it's really boring. It's constant jump cuts. It's constant just saying what doesn't need to be said, but what you could really express visually on its own. And it's kind of made the newest biopics stale because a lot of them followed the not only financial success, but cast success that this movie did. And to me, that staleness resonates more than the actual message that the movie tells because it's not creative. When I look at Into the Wild and Blackberry, the things they did in those movies were really unique and creative to express not only what the main character felt, but what the filmmaker was trying to portray. Meanwhile, this one really just seems like you took a book about this, for instance, and just threw it on a script and then made it with jump cuts and a really solid actor. Rami Malek is excellent in this, don't get me wrong, but it just is boring to me on a filmmaking level.
I think there's something to be said too about the idea, the fact that Roger Taylor and Brian May were both very heavily involved with this film. So, I mean, there's a protection at that point. They don't want to crap on Freddie's legacy. They don't want to crap on John Deacon's legacy, or their own for that matter. You know, so I'm sure there was probably a almost a hesitation to go beyond, you know, for lack of a better term, the Coles Notes version of the behind the scenes. Gwillem Lee as Brian May is spot on. Like, you would think they were related the way he looks on screen. Ben Hardy as Roger Taylor, pretty good, but Gwillem Lee, like, Brian May has a very iconic look to him. There are certain musicians that if they walk across the street, you don't even have to question if it's them. That hair is Brian May, and he looked the part and sounded the part too. But I'm going to ask you this before we go any further. Are you a fan of Queen music?
I am. And that's the thing that I think stifled me the most. And you said it best yourself, and I said it before. The casting is impeccable. I have no problems with the acting in this movie whatsoever. And to an extent, it can still be an entertaining movie. And I was fascinated to find out more in depth about the life of the group. But watching this, I just couldn't help but notice that, not that I didn't care, because obviously I did, being a fan of their music and the story and everything that went into their life, but I truly felt I was just watching a dramatized documentary to a sense. And like I said, this is by no means a bad movie. It's just personally my pass on, I don't think I'll ever go back to it because I respect the music a hell of a lot more than I respect this film as it's developed. if that makes sense.
I mean, I remember watching the Freddie Mercury tribute concert live on Much Music when it happened. I mean, that was, a seminal moment in my, watching concerts on TV kind of history. And then it was really, that expanded my knowledge of Queen. And yes, I do love Queen. Like, I don't know, aside from classic Queen and, the greatest hits, and of course, Innuendo, which I think is a fantastic film, I don't have many Queen albums in my collection, but you knew the music. You loved the music. But I guess it's one of those things where Freddie Mercury is a beloved singer, even in death. So, I mean, you walk a fine line, right? You don't want to, if you make a film that trashes the legacy, not even trashes, but that doesn't put it in the, the for lack of a better term, put him up on a pedestal, would people still praise it? So, I mean, I could see why, from an excitement point of view, it kind of feels more like if you had real actors in VH1's Behind the Music. I understand that. It's probably a bold choice. People are sitting there going, I don't like your pick, but I respect you for making it, I guess. But you're Queen. Freddie Mercury, awesome.
The worst part is the one movie that I actually was going to put up here before I contemplated this one, and this is going to really piss people off, is I was going to put the 2018 Gotti with John Travolta. Just, I don't know if you've seen it. It's a mess of a film. It's inaccurate. It's honestly an abomination to not only cinema biopics, but to the mob movie genre, if you even want to put it in there. But at least with that one, it kind of made me stop and think, as opposed to Bohemian Rhapsody, where I feel like I was just consuming media.
You do realize that with a 24% Metacritic score, we may find ourselves talking about Gotti somewhere down the road.
I am so down, because there's so much to divulge on that film that it could be a great conversation.
You're going to love-hate doing that episode, aren't you?
Ow, 100%.
All right. My Pass film is a film that we have talked about, not on Keep Watch Pass, and not on It's Not That Bad. But we talked about it during our special on the 43rd Razzies Worst Film nominations. I'm talking about Blonde, starring Ana de Armas as Marilyn Monroe. We talked about Bohemian Rhapsody, not wanting to crap all over the legacy of Freddie Mercury. This film took a giant Oscar-sized, Razzie-sized all over the legacy of Marilyn Monroe. And that's, I don't want to take away anything from what Ana de Armas did in her performance as Marilyn Monroe. She surprised me with how spot on she was and sounded and looked as Marilyn Monroe. But this film is pure exploitation. It's NC-17 for the sake of getting eyeballs on the screen. It took the memory of Marilyn Monroe and basically did what Hollywood tried to do to her in real life. Put her up on a poster, exploit the crap out of her, and try to rake the money in. That's basically what it did. And that's not good.
And I haven't seen it. I've seen clips here and there, and obviously the discourse of the movie. But not only did I hear it's disappointing, but I don't know if you can also add to this, but I heard there was a lot of inaccuracy that they tried to kind of hide behind Ana de Armas's interpretation and role, which, to what you just said, I also heard was pretty good. But from a film perspective, it was just not what people interpreted.
Yeah, no, it's based on the book Blonde by Joyce Carol Oates, which is a fictionalized take on Marilyn Monroe. So it's not even necessarily a biopic. Obviously, there are beats and moments in the film that are anchored in reality and anchored in the history of Marilyn Monroe. But I mean, holy crap, does this film, like, it's almost like they're like, we know what we are, and we're going to sell sex, and we're going to sell literally the hottest actress of the moment. And we're going to get her naked and we're going to have her have sex on screen. And that's what we're going to do. And you're going to like it. NC-17 on Netflix. Because for whatever reason, that's how they thought was going to be the selling point. And that's not good.
So would you say that this falls as a biopic, maybe similar in category to the Beatles biopic Yesterday, where it's a fictionalized take on real world events then?
Not even that. Because it feels like it's more of a salacious retelling of things. You know, I mean, you want to take a fictionalized biopic look at somebody and have it be okay. You go to watch Weird, the Al Yankovic story on Roku, and because
Love that, by the way,
because that is done in good taste and in good humor, and you know Al Yankovic himself is behind the film, and that's okay. I'm cool
and it's
with that.
about exactly what he did. It's a parody movie on biopics because he parodied music. So even though it's not accurate, there's that grounded substance of the fan base.
Yeah, I mean, you take a look at the Razzie nominations for this. 1, Worst Picture. 1, Worst Screenplay. Nominated twice for Worst Screen Combo. The first one was both real-life characters in the fallacious White House bedroom scene. Yeah. And then nominated for Andrew Dominic, the director, and quote-unquote his issues with women. That's not a good thing. It's not. And I feel bad because Ana de Armas, at this point in her career, is straight up on a pedestal. She is everyone's go-to for this point. And it feels like this was not the movie that she needed to do.
You know what I think of? And it's awful when I think of Ana de Armas. And it's Knock Knock with Keanu Reeves.
Which, of course, itself is a remake, and I'm fine with that. You know, paired with her and Lorenza Izzo, they were fine in it. It's a Keanu Reeves film. But I mean, you take a look at some of the other films that, you know, Blade Runner 2049, which is a fantastic film. Knives Out, that's becoming quite the franchise in and of itself. But then to the same token as well, I mean, The Gray Man had promise, but in that same year of 2022, she had Blonde and Deep Water, her, you know, Ben Affleck in a relationship film right around the time that they broke up, because that's not good. And then the next year it's Ghosted. So it's like she's being put in these films, and yes, she's of the moment, but the moment is taking all the fun out of the moment. And that's not good.
No, I can appreciate that. And I'm trying to think of like a good comparable right now too, to just her kind of acting in her filmography situation. Like, I wanted to initially say Glenn Powell in the sense of like he's just in your face right now, but I'm also like he's had, I feel like, maybe a more consistent blockbuster filmography in terms of success. Not to have that diminish her roles, but I mean, maybe that's off track, but it's just trying to, a mental comparable I'm trying to.
I think probably the best comparison at this point, at least currently right now, might be Sydney Sweeney, in that she's getting put into a lot of films mainly because of the look and because she's very much of the moment. I think Ana de Armas is a better actress than Sydney Sweeney, but then again, I also think Sydney Sweeney has picked some ridiculously horrible films. Madam Web, I'm looking at you. But that's the problem, though, is that some actors and actresses are hot for a couple of years. And I don't mean hot like looks. I mean hot like of the pop culture moment. They are everywhere.
That fits better to Glenn Powell than my previous.
Oh, very
example.
much so. Very much. And Shia LaBeouf was the same way when Transformers started happening, and then Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, and then iRobot. There was a moment where Shia LaBeouf was everywhere, and then he fizzled out a little bit. And you know, he's starting to come back, and then that's okay, right? And I find that happens more with actresses, where it's like, oh, she's spot on. Let's put her in everything. And then in like 4 or 5 years, like, all right, let's move on to the next one. It's not good. And I hope that Ana de Armas, and Sydney Sweeney too, get bigger, better roles. I really hope. I mean, obviously, John Wick Presents Ballerina is going to be coming out in 2025. So there's a hope that that's going to really kind of put her over the top, because I think she's good. I think she fits that role very well. We just need that role to happen sooner.
She has the chops. She has the ability. There's nothing I don't like about her performances. I don't know if it's me. This is really, really speculative, but I'm like, I don't know if it's an agent thing. I don't know if it's a personal thing, but it just seems like the roles she's either being presented or given are just, and this maybe sounds rude, but almost below her. There's a ceiling there. It's like having a prospect in sports. There's a ceiling and there's a floor. I feel like right now she's closer to the floor, but not because of her ability, just because of her situation, I guess.
Yeah, you could see there are points where like they're cruising, and all of a sudden they take that one roll and it starts to go downhill from there. Tara Reid, American Pie films, and then all of a sudden it's like, and then there's Sharknado. And then it's you can't get out of Sharknado. I'm hoping Ana de Armas doesn't go down Sharknado road, because again, she is the best part of Blonde. She's the only reason why Blonde was even talked about for the Oscars at all. So if that tells you something, you could be in the worst film of the year and you can be nominated for Best Actress at the Oscars. That's how good she is, but that doesn't make Blonde a good film. All right, Carson, thank you so much for this. Now, remind our listeners what your keep, watch, and pass biopic films were.
My keep was the incredible, go see it. I'm not going to stress that enough. Buy it, rent it, stream it. I don't care. Blackberry, watch it. You'll love it. It's incredible. My watch was Into the Wild. Sean Penn directed, starring Emile Hirsch. An incredible emotional story, really about the true existence of life and experience. And then my pass was the controversial Bohemian Rhapsody.
And for me, my keep was Catch Me If You Can. My watch was Dragon, the Bruce Lee story. And my pass was Blonde. Carson, thank you so much for this. Now, please remind our listeners where they can find you out there on the interwebs.
You can find me at Carson Elk 12. That's ELC12 at the end on Twitter and X.
All right, dude. You know, there's always a mic waiting for you whenever you want to come on back on the show.
I always appreciate it, and I'm sure you'll hear my voice again.
Absolutely. And to you, our dear listeners, you guys know the drill. If there's a topic that you want us to cover on Keep, Watch, Pass, or a movie you want us to cover on It's Not That Bad, hit us up on social media at Not That Badcast, or go to our website at notthatbadcast.com. And while you're there, make sure you check out our music side of shows. There can only be one, and spin, shuffle, skip. Until next time, he's Carson. I'm Jay. You guys are awesome. This is Keep, Watch, Pass on the It's Not That Bad podcast channel, a proud member of the Pantheon Podcast Network. Take care.